guys, welcome back for week 4 of Disney Halloween Dessert Dupes. This week I think is probably the fastest, simplest recipe we've made so far, but it's delicious. So this week we are making pumpkin sugar cookies. Now, the foodie guide describes these as, they're called pumpkin sugar cookie, and it's a tie-dyed Halloween sugar cookie with buttercream. And you can find these around at various resorts this Halloween season. So the tie-dye part is in the cookie dough, and it's super fun. Just like some of them look like this, and then, you know, they're all different kind of tie-dye. But anyways, if you want to make some pumpkin tie-dye sugar cookies with me this week, then let's go. We're gonna get those ingredients together and get started. Okay, before we get started, let's go ahead and get our ingredients out and measured so that the whole process goes even faster. This is going to be a pretty simple recipe today. So let's start with our cookie ingredients. So we want to start off with a cup of salted butter. Now I have 2 cups here because we're going to be using a cup for the cookies and a cup for the frosting. So in total we need 2 cups of salted butter at room temperature. We need 1 cup of granulated sugar, a tablespoon of vanilla, and then we need another tablespoon for the frosting. We need 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 egg, and then I am using this Bob's Red Mill gluten-free 1-to-1 flour. So this one, they have a couple of different 1-to-1 flours, but this one you don't have to add your own xanthan gum or anything, and this is like my favorite gluten-free flour. So if you are gluten-free, I would recommend this type for this recipe. It's in the blue bag, not the purple bag, the blue bag. We got this. And then the rest of our ingredients for our frosting is going to be 4 cups of powdered sugar and about 2 tablespoons of milk. And then we also need some food dye. I've got green, purple, and orange. That's the name of that color here, because we're making the tie-dye cookie base. And then we'll use our purple and our green for the frosting. And then I have some cookie cutters. Now these were the only pumpkin cutters I could find. The sizes are a little weird because we have this really tiny one which is super cute. And we got this one which is a little small, I think, for the cookie that you would get in Disney World. And then there's this massive one which I think is a little big for the cookie you would get in Disney World. So hey, whatever size cookie that you're feeling that day, just use that size cutter. Or you might be able to find a more normal size pumpkin cutter. And then a rolling pin. And if you don't have a rolling pin, just use a cup. Anything works. And then these are guides. These are not necessary, but it's just basically to make sure that the dough rolls out like uniform and there's no like lumps and bumps or anything like that. So you can, I used to use those paint stir sticks. Obviously if you've dipped them in paint, don't do that. But you can glue 2 of them together and it's about this thickness, and then so you can use 4 in total to use as guides if you want to. If you don't want to use guides, that's totally fine too. So once you have all of your ingredients ready and measured out, meet me over at the mixing bowl and we will get started. Okay, so in the bowl of our stand mixer, we want to add 1 cup of salted butter, and 1 cup is 2 sticks, so it's pretty easy to measure out. We want that butter to be room temperature, and we want to add 1 cup of granulated sugar. Now we want to start mixing on low speed because we don't want flying sugar. everywhere in the kitchen because it's messy. And so we want that butter and sugar to start incorporating a little bit before we turn the mixer speed up. Now, as a reminder, of course, you can find the recipe card for this recipe as well as all of our other Disney dessert dupes over on the website, which is yourhappiesttravel.com, and you can click free resource library. In that library, you're going to find recipes and park guides, all kinds of Disney World goodies you'll find in there, and it's updated all the time, so you'll find all kinds of new information every week in there. So now that our butter and sugar are incorporating well, we want to turn our mixer up higher to a medium high so we can make sure that any clumps of butter or clumps of sugar are getting worked out and everything is really nicely mixed together. Now make sure you're periodically scraping your bowl down so that everything is nice and incorporated when we get our dough together. We don't want any clumps of butter or sugar because they will melt in the oven instead of kind of baking into a cookie. It kind of makes some pools of butter and sugar and it's not cute. So make sure that your butter and sugar are nice and mixed thoroughly, taking the time to scrape down your bowl. So now to that, we're going to add our 1 egg, and we're going to go ahead and mix that with our vanilla. It's 1 tablespoon of vanilla. And we're going to go ahead and mix that up. So I went ahead and put it on medium speed because everything's kind of a wet consistency. I'm not worried about the air kind of making the dry ingredients fly out of the bowl or anything like that. So we just want our egg and vanilla to incorporate really well with our butter and sugar, taking the time to scrape down the sides of our bowl to make sure that all the clumps come out of it and everything is evenly mixed. Now that all of our wet ingredients are combined nice and evenly, we are going to add our first cup of flour. Now we're going to add these in 3 batches of 1 cup each. So we'll put the 1 cup in and we will let it mix on low until most of the dry ingredients are mixed in with the wet ingredients. And then we will add our 2nd cup and repeat the process. Just give it a second to incorporate so we don't have a bunch of flying flour everywhere in our kitchen. And then as it incorporates and it's more combined than it is not combined, we'll add our 3rd cup of flour. And we're going to let this mix on low until it's forming more of a dough and not lots of flour sitting on top of wet ingredients. And then once it starts forming our dough, we want to go ahead and scrape down the sides of our bowl so that there's not any dry bits hiding underneath our dough so that it's nice and incorporated and will bake up beautifully. And then we can turn our mixer back on and let it come together more. And you'll notice as it mixes, it starts pulling away from the sides. There's not much that is stuck to the side, and that's kind of the consistency that you're looking for. Depending on your batter, you might have to add more, or if it's dry, you might have to add a few teaspoons of water. But you want a batter that sticks together, but it's not sticky. So now that we have our batter to the correct consistency, we're going to head over and dye the batter. So I am just scraping the bowl down, getting all of that dough out so we don't waste any bit of it. And you'll see that I have gloves on here, and that's because I don't want dye all over my hands. And I did put a piece of parchment down under the dough just so we don't get the dye directly on the table. Now once the dye is incorporated to the dough, it's not going to leave really any stain or residue on your hands or anything like that. But getting it directly out of the tube, putting it on the dough, you don't want any like spillage. So basically here I want to make one ball of dough so that I can divide it into 3 parts. So I'm just gonna eyeball it here and divide it into 3 pieces so that I can do my 3 colored dyes on it. And I'm just gonna put a few drops of each color on the separate pieces of dough. Once I get all of the colors on my cookie dough, I'm going to start kneading the separate colors into the pieces of dough. And it's kind of difficult with these giant gloves on, but they only had one size gloves and my hands are kind of tiny, so it does make it a little difficult, but it was worth it to not have my hands dyed for the weekend. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying, but it works. So I've sped up the kneading process, as you can probably tell, but I'm just repeating the kneading and mixing for each of the colors of dough. This would have been a really good activity for a kid to do, but my kid was preoccupied, so here I am kneading the dough. And as you can tell, I ditched one of my gloves, but I was using my gloved hand to kind of get the initial color mixed in, and then once it mixes in, then I can use my other hand to finish it out. Just that getting the initial glob of color mixed in is really all you need, and then it won't get all over your hands. Okay, now that we have our dough colors mixed together, I'm just breaking off pieces and forming kind of a different dough ball, but we want to incorporate the different colors. So when we roll out the dough, we'll have that nice tie-dyed, kind of folded in colors. So it doesn't really matter, there's no rhyme or reason, I'm just pinching pieces of dough off and forming a different dough ball, basically. We want to make sure that all of our colors are spread out and make sure that not really having a big chunk of one color together. And now that I have that done, I'm going to knead it one more time so that it's a nice secure dough ball before we roll it out. And once it's incorporated like that, I'm going to ditch my piece of parchment so that I can roll out on my clean work surface. Don't worry, it's a clean table. And I'm not worried about getting the dye on the table because it is mixed into the dough. So I've got my guides down and I just put some flour onto my work surface. And then I'm going to flour the top of my dough so that my rolling pin doesn't stick. And I'm going to start rolling out, and as you can see, my roller is kind of going side to side so that we don't have one long skinny rolled piece of dough, which it doesn't really matter, it just kind of gives you more surface area to work with. And really push down hard if you're using guides. If you're not using guides, you don't want to push down that hard because your cookie's just going to be flat. And you don't really want that. We want our cookie to be about a 1/4 inch thick, and we want it to be as flat of a surface as possible so all of our cookies are a uniform size. So I am just using my cookie cutter and cutting out some cookies. If your cookies stick to the table, you need to lift your dough up and put some more flour under there. As you can see, there's plenty of flour on the bottom of mine, so they are not sticking to the table. So I'm just taking my time here and cutting my cookie dough out. And when I put them on my pan, I'm giving about a 1/2 inch between each cookie. Because for my cookie dough recipe that I always use, you don't have to freeze the dough. Some recipes for sugar cookies, for rollout sugar cookies, you have to freeze it before you put it in the oven. This is not one of those recipes. It can go directly into the oven, and it might, what am I thinking of? They might spread out a little bit, so you want to give your cookies maybe about a 1/2 inch between each other. You don't want them to touch once they go in the oven. The recipe won't spread too much, but of course it will do it just a little bit, so give your cookies about a 1/2 inch in between each other. Once you have your cookie sheet full, you're going to throw those in the oven at 350 and bake them for about 14 minutes. You'll want to turn your tray halfway, but keep an eye on them because everyone's oven is different, but mine took about 14 minutes. Once our cookies are out of the oven and cooling, we're going to go ahead and mix together our buttercream. So starting with 1 cup of salted butter that's at room temperature, we're going to add our 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. And of course, you can find this recipe card over in the free resources library on yourhappiesttravel.com. And we're going to scrape down our bowl again. And we'll add our 4 cups of powdered sugar. Now we want to do this slowly. You don't want to dump it all in the bowl at once because it will create a powdered sugar cloud. We're going to go ahead and add our 2 tablespoons of milk before adding the rest of our powdered sugar in. Go ahead and give it a scrape so that that butter isn't just hanging out in the paddle. It tends to do that. And then we will start our mixer back on low and add in the rest of our powdered sugar. Now go ahead and let that mix on low until the dry ingredients are more incorporated with our wet ingredients so that we don't make a big giant mess. But once it starts incorporating like this, we can go ahead and speed our mixer up to high so we get that nice fluffy buttercream. And this isn't sped up, by the way. This is real time with the setting on high. And then once it incorporates, we're going to go ahead and turn the mixer off, and we're going to save some of this buttercream for, well, first we have to take a taste test, of course, But then we're going to set aside a few scoops for our green color for the stems and the little leaves. So I'm just putting that in a separate small bowl so that we can mix the green by hand. But since we mostly need orange icing, I'm going to let the mixer do most of the work for us so we don't, tire our arm out too much. So I'm just scraping down the bowl. And once I've given the bowl a good scrape, I'm going to go ahead and add in about 4 drops of my orange food coloring. Now this didn't end up being enough, and I ended up adding about 4 more drops, which you'll see in a minute, but we're just going to let that mix to save our shoulder and neck muscles. Now that our orange is mostly mixed together, I'm going to scrape my paddle and get the rest of that buttercream off and get it out of the way. And I am going to mix the rest in by hand so I can make sure that everything is evenly mixed and it's one solid orange color. Once your orange frosting is nice and mixed, we're going to grab our little bowl of white icing and put our green food coloring in it. It's much easier to do these little small batches by hand. This one's no problem. We'll just mix it together very quickly before we bag it and get to decorating our tie-dye cookies. We are finally ready to decorate our little pumpkin. So I have a bag of orange frosting that I've just snipped the tip off of, and then a bag of green icing, which I snipped the tip off much smaller. And we have our plate of our tie-dye cookies. Now I'm holding the icing bag and rolling it in my hand, and it's much easier to pipe that way. So I am just going to start with this little backwards C shape. And then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. And then building the sections, we are just gonna go on top of that first section just a little bit and pipe over it and repeating it on the other side. And finally doing a little oval shape in the middle to create those little pumpkin sections. And then we take our green icing and we are just letting the icing fall and moving our hand just a little bit to make little curly cues. But as you can see, I'm holding that bag way up over the cookie, so the icing is just falling out of the bag and making those little leaf patterns. And then I'm just going to make some little lines and create the stem. And that's it. That's how you decorate the pumpkin cookie. Now to decorate the little tiny pumpkin cookie, it's basically the same thing, but we're only making 3 sections instead of 5. So that backward C shape, the forward C shape, and then the oval. And then we're gonna make our tiny little vines and stem for our little miniature pumpkins. Alright you guys, I hope that you have enjoyed baking with me today, and I hope that you made some beautiful little pumpkins. They're just so cute. I'm trying to grab one. There they are. Sometimes that simple sugar cookie buttercream combo is just, you can't get anything better than that. So I hope that you enjoyed making these with me today. I hope that you share them with your friends and family. And if you are interested in taking a trip to Disney World, let's get started today. You can head over to my website, yourhappiesttravel.com, and from there you can fill out your form and we can get started today. So enjoy your cookies, have a great weekend, and I will see you next week for week number 5. Bye.